Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. The Empire are winning. Yes, it is as surprising to me as it probably is to you. However, for the two local tournaments that have happened most recently, one player has ripped up the local scene, winning both events with the forces of the Empire. So I'm going to take a quick dive into the list he's been taking, and I'll comment as to why I think it's been particularly effective. I'll also comment around how I might do things differently myself based on the sort of lists I've been using over the past year or so. So, without any further ado, let's dive into the list. And let's start by having a look at the characters. The main thing to note with the characters is there are 3 level 4 wizard lords, all 3 of which are riding a Pegasus and are utilising battle magic. The general has the armour of Tarnus and Wizard's Familiar. The second level 4 has the ruby ring of Ruin, the white cloak and twin-tailed wand, with the third bearing the talisman of protection. Now, before we move on to the other character in the list, what do I think here? Well, obviously battle magic I think is an absolutely fantastic law of magic when it comes to the Empire. It's got so many really good quality spells. Obviously, if you want to reach out and touch your opponent, you've got things like the Vortex spell, you've got the Fireball spell. You've also got a spell which really helps out with movement, and that's something we're going to see coming back as a point of note a little bit down the line. I actually think the signature spell for Empire is quite useful as well, and personally I've had a surprisingly high amount of success with a wizard wading into combat, casting Hammer Hand, and just beating the snot out of whatever he's come up against, as unlikely as that sounds. Now, I think for this particular build, there are a couple of spells in battle magic which are less useful. One is Curse Varro Attraction, which allows a player to reroll wands with rolling to hit for shooting. And the reason I'm saying that is because this list, with a couple of exceptions, doesn't have missile fire that requires rolling to hit in that way. So it's not a spell that's going to be particularly useful for this list. The other is the spell that gives you a 5-up ward save for the wizard and the unit they're in. And that's because with the Talisman of Protection, with the White Cloak, etc., the wizards running around, they've got that 5-up in place already, so that spell is not going to be particularly helpful, and it's highly unlikely that they'll be joining a unit. The whole reason for putting them on Pegasi is to allow them to move around the tabletop quickly and to get into good positions to utilise their spells. Now, with 3 level 4 wizards and the Throne of Skulls composition rules, which are hanging around in the ether, if it's true that those are going to become the standard through some kind of update later this year, and that is absolutely just a rumour at this point, that will of course have a severe impact on this list, because you would be restricted in the number of level 4s. However, you'd probably see 1 level 4 as the general, 2 level 3s backing it up, so not a huge difference there. Final character, just to note, is an Empire engineer armed with a repeater handgun. I suspect the repeater handgun is probably here because the person had a few points to play with. Empire engineers at 45 points in their pants are absolutely fantastic purchases, particularly if you've got a lot of war machines. Personally, I would normally take 2 in my list. However, 1 is probably about right for this particular one, given the amount of artillery. Let's turn our attention now to the core, and this is made up exclusively of knights of the Empire. We've got a unit of 7 knights armed with lances, shields, heavy armour, full command, and they are drilled. Second is a unit of 6. Again, lances, shield, heavy armour, full command, and drilled. That being limited to 1 unit per 1,000 points. The third unit of knights, 7 Empire knights with, you guessed it, lances, shield, heavy armour, full command, does not have the drilled special rule. So what is so good here? Well, you've got a lot of figures with a pretty good armour save at 3 up from the heavy armour, shield, barding. And there are also, you stick them in the marching column, utilising that drilled special rule at least for 2 of the units. Throw in the fact that your wizards, almost certainly between them, 1 of them, or probably 2 of them, will have some movement spells. You've got a really mobile force. Now, I have actually come up against an iteration of this list in one of the 2 tournaments that I mentioned previously. And it was the final game of the tournament, an Empire off. My opponent, the owner of this particular list, went first, and his knight really got into some good positions early. Fair play to him, he is an excellent player, but those units whipping up forward, utilising drilled, become a real pain. They can get some really good angles for turn 2 charges that are going to be difficult to deal with. The unit without drilled is perhaps slightly less effective, not having that rule, but a unit of 7 heavy cavalry armed with lances, as much as Empire Knights perhaps do have a bit of a tendency to bounce at times, they are without doubt the best core option, I think, for the Empire, and up to, including the champion, 8 attacks at strength 5. You've got to take that seriously, particularly with the armour penetration value of the Knight Lance to back it up. Would I do anything differently here? I'm not seeing many draws when it comes to combat in Warhammer the Old World. So perhaps the musicians, there are a few points there that could be saved and do something else with. Perhaps looking towards building towards a magical standard for one of the units. I think actually things like the War Banner carry really good value for Imperial Knights. That +1 combat res can go a surprisingly long way, particularly when you're looking at a list that doesn't have combat characters, which doesn't have a battle standard bearer. So anything to give you that little edge in combat, just to make sure that your opponents are pushed towards falling back in good order or running away rather than just giving ground, is going to be a useful thing. Let's turn our attention now to the special slots. And what we see here is 3 Great Cannon. I don't think this comes as any particular surprise when facing an Empire list. The Great Cannon are really useful. Now, I've commented that following the latest changes to the rules and the clarification that cannonballs can't go over hills, I don't think cannons are quite as good as they used to be, because it's now easier to screen your forces by popping them on or behind a hill. You're not getting the bounce through. You're not going to be able to engage targets you can't see, and that is utterly sensible from a realism perspective. It's bad enough, it always has been bad enough, having laser-sighted Great Cannon, and I say this as an Empire player. However, they still do offer good value, particularly taking down high toughness, high number of wounds, high armour targets. They can do an awful lot of damage when they hit. Now, these are the only 3 war machines in this particular force, so when I said about the number of engineers, 1 engineer can probably keep 3 Great Cannon going. The odds of failing that first dice roll, rolling the misfire and having more than 1 cannon damaging itself is unlikely. So yeah, some pretty solid choices here, and definitely a projection of power which is going to worry most opponents. It's a good way, I think, for this list as well to also deal with things like dragons, the Scream list, where it's relying, your enemy that is relying on large targets, big creatures to get in your face. This will help keep those lists honest. Turning now to rare, the final item in the list is the good old Steam Tank. Now, at 265 points, I do sometimes wonder whether the Steam Tank really offers great value. It's armed with a steam cannon rather than a great cannon. Now, yes, it's not as powerful as a great cannon, but that mobility from being attached to, well, a moving heavy chariot is quite useful. It can help you get angles on targets which are tough to deal with. But I think the main thing the Steam Tank really brings to the party is its resilience. It's really difficult to get rid of. It's tough, lots of wounds, really good armor save. There's a lot of things out there that really struggle to deal with it. So it's good at real points denial for your opponent. And it's no slouch in close combat. So why am I saying I'm not sure it's necessarily worth it? Well, I think it's quite difficult for a Steam Tank to necessarily get those 265 points back. It can really get wrapped up in combats it doesn't necessarily want to be in for quite a long time. It will take it quite a while to grind through, and then it's not really doing an awful lot else. It not being the quickest thing out there as well means that your opponent could feed it chaff to slow it down, keep it occupied. Yes, they're not getting the 265 points it's worth, but you're not smashing into the high value targets either. From my perspective, what would I do differently? Now, at events I've gone to where I've played seriously with Empire, I've taken a Steam Tank. I'm starting to be more attracted to the idea of doubling up, however, on the Hellblaster volley gun, taking 2, possibly 3 engineers in my list in order to keep all of the big guns firing, really doubling down into that artillery. Historically, what have I used? I've tended to run a couple of units of knights, a unit of archers as my core, 2-3 great cannon, plenty of outriders, love outriders, and steam tank and volley gun. Obviously, taking a list that is closer to this one would see me sacrificing those outriders, which is interesting because actually I think those outriders for me have always, not always, often provided good value. So I'd probably want to keep at least 1 unit in there. And if nothing else, it's an early deployment chaff unit. It can be used to clear enemy chaff, opening the doors for the heavy cavalry to go flying through the gap and engage the targets they want to be engaged with. But there we have it. We have a list which seems to be doing well, and considering the Empire are consistently bottom of the pack, I think that's credit not only to the strength of this list, but obviously huge props to the player himself, who's been very successful with it. A highly skilled player and known for that locally as well. It is worth bearing that in mind. So do let me know, what do you think of this particular list? How would you amend it? Are there any particular units you think this list is absolutely screaming out for? Would you say change the Pegasi out for regular warhorses to build you those extra few points in order to have the extra couple of toys in your list? As I say, let me know all of that down in the comments below. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope you found it useful. If you have, do consider a like and subscribe. It's the best way of helping a small channel such as this one. All that remains for me to say is once again, thank you very much. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.